sport model UFOs, undiscovered elements, a prostitution ring, rocket cars, alien Jesus, FBI raids, and a fascination with fireworks are all major factors in the life of a man named Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar first made himself known to the world under the pseudonym Dennis in an interview with KLA's George Knapp, an investigative journalist, who would later go on to win a Peabody Award for exceptional journalism for his efforts. Afraid of the repercussions he would face for revealing the government's most classified projects, Bob revealed sensitive information about his time working for the US government under a false name. But Dennis was a real person. The real Dennis was Bob's superior at S4, a highly classified Air Force facility relatively unknown to the public at the time, and said to be in close proximity to Area 51. And Dennis wasn't too happy about Bob's interview, or the use of his name. Bob's story has been ridiculed and criticized by some, and taken as proof by others, that the United States government has made contact with extraterrestrial species, and is using alien technology to further their own military advancement. Bob has faced multiple criminal convictions since revealing this information to the press, and has had his education and work history questioned, all records seemingly erased. Whether the claims made against him are true or scapegoating attempts to attack his credibility, and whether what Bob is saying is even true, are all topics we will explore today. On Our Strange Reality, we take crazy concepts and scientific evidence, mash them together, and make our own hypothesis on the conspiracies, mysteries, and unexplainable circumstances that plague our world. In 1989, an investigative journalist named George Knapp began looking into the world of UFOs, and soon after, in May of that year, met a man who would go by the name Dennis. Dennis claimed many seemingly ridiculous things: that he had worked at S4, a base nearby and similar to Area 51, that the government had made contact with extraterrestrial beings, and that he had been hired to reverse engineer an anti-gravity propulsion system harnessing the power of an undiscovered element, based on what he could learn from disassembling the myriad of otherworldly spacecrafts in the government's possession. But there was something about Dennis that made all of his claims seem true. He had the knowledge to back it up, he seemed to be a very serious and stoic man, and he genuinely seemed worried for his own safety. Hence the KLA's effort to keep him anonymous. Dennis's real name was Bob Lazar. Bob, from a young age, had an interest in chemistry, physics, and rocket propulsion systems. His mother recalls that when he was still a boy, he came into the kitchen, excited to tell her he had made a real rocket and would be setting it off in the yard that evening. His mother, both impressed and terrified, worried that the next step in Bob's scientific journey would end up in the explosion and destruction of their home. Despite that, his mother still encouraged her genius of a boy to continue on the path he was on, and his interest in effective sources of power wouldn't wane over time. As an adult, Bob would be featured in a Los Alamos newspaper. It profiled the man, his interests, and his latest project, a jet-powered car he had built. Rocket propulsion systems were something Bob had always had an interest in, and would continue all the way through his life. In 1987, Bob and a friend, Gene Huff, started a festival in the Nevada desert for pyrotechnic enthusiasts, named Operation Desert Blast after the famous Operation Desert Storm. The festival features homemade explosives, rockets, jet-powered vehicles, and other pyrotechnics, aimed at emphasizing the fun aspects of chemistry and physics. To this day, Bob still makes and sells fireworks. George Knapp wouldn't share his story, or his interview with Dennis, Bob, with the world until nearly 6 months after it had taken place. As an honorable journalist, in a time when they still existed, he had to verify everything he had been told. But there was a problem. Upon calling Caltech, the school Bob was supposed to have attended, he found no records of his studies. He also contacted Los Alamos National Lab, where Lazar reported he had previously worked. They denied ever having a Robert Lazar employed. A company known as EG&G, where Lazar said he had been interviewed for his job at S4, also denied ever having met with or having any records on a Bob Lazar. But that wouldn't stop George Knapp. He did his research and eventually was able to find a 1982 phone book of the Los Alamos lab, and discovered they were either unorganized or lying to him. Robert Lazar's name was there, in plain black and white. The Los Alamos newspaper feature on Bob, which was previously mentioned, also referred to Bob's job at Los Alamos National Lab. It even mentions him working with scientists at NASA. So there was proof out there. When George reached out to Los Alamos again and presented them with this information, a frustrated official once again denied Bob ever having worked with the lab. In the years since, Bob has discovered that all of his schooling records, and even his birth records from the hospital he was born in, have seemingly been expunged, and are nowhere to be found. I discovered a few things after initially recording, so I felt like I should add them in. There are records of Bob Lazar's attendance of high school, as well as his attendance at Pierce College, where he never received any kind of degree. Later, he would reference a degree he received from Pacifica University, a Bachelor's of Science in Technology and Physics. But strangely, there are no records of an accredited university by that name. There are also records where his occupation was recorded as an electronics engineer. He did remember the name of an employee at EG&G though, that was assigned to doing a background check on him. The uniquely named Mike Thigpen, who has since been tracked down and has confirmed that he did work with EG&G and does remember a Bob Lazar. The funny thing is, it wasn't common knowledge at the time that EG&G conducted interviews for government installations, but somehow Bob knew. If he was a liar, he had definitely done his research. Upon discovering that Bob had indeed worked with Los Alamos Lab, and that they fervently denied his employment there, George Knapp was convinced of the man's integrity, at least for part of what he was saying. Knowing his sources were at least partially accurate, George released his expose in November of 1989.
Sir, how do we know you are who you say you are and that you actually have knowledge about what's going on at Groom Lake?
Well, I guess there's no way you could really know. There's really no way I can prove it without revealing my identity and getting myself into more trouble than I have already.
Exactly what's going on up there?
Well, there's several, actually 9 flying saucers, flying discs, that are out there of extraterrestrial origin, and they're being test flown and basically just analyzed.
You say there's 9 saucers. How are those tests going? As far as whether they're successful and that sort of thing?
Oh, well, some of them are 100% intact and operate perfectly. The other ones are being taken apart. I was involved mainly in propulsion and the power source.
Where did we get these saucers? How did they come into the hands of the government?
I haven't the slightest idea, and you have to understand the information is very compartmentalized, and I was only allowed information that pertained particularly to what I was involved in.
But I mean, couldn't our government have made them as opposed to getting them from some alien beings?
Totally impossible. The propulsion system is a gravity propulsion system. The power source is an antimatter reactor. This technology does not exist at all. In fact, one of the reasons that I'm going forward with this information, it's not only a crime against the American people, it's a crime against the scientific community, which I've been part of for some time, or actively trying to duplicate these systems, yet they are in existence now and basically in the hands of the government.
What would happen to you if the government learned that you were giving us this information?
Anything could happen. I don't know. I haven't the slightest idea.
Well, you said you referred to getting into trouble. Have you had some repercussions?
I've been threatened with being charged with espionage. I've had my life threatened by them, my wife's life threatened by them, and I mean, I don't know where else you can go from there.
Within a few weeks, the interview with Dennis was being shown all around the world. Pirated tapes ended up in movie theaters. Japanese filmmakers would make nationally broadcast animated specials, and interested individuals began trying to identify the man known only as Dennis. Though Bob described his employment at a facility designated the name S4, people didn't know where that was, so they began showing up at the outskirts of Area 51, hoping to catch a glimpse of some of the strange alien technology that the government was supposedly testing. S4 was relatively unknown to the world at the time, and was claimed to be nearby the Groom Lake facility. Bob would start adventuring out to the Nevada desert too, even before his interview had been aired, desperate to prove to his friends and loved ones that he indeed was telling the truth. He would start taking his friends out on Wednesday nights, the days designated for testing the otherworldly aircrafts, and would capture footage, convincing his close friends that he indeed wasn't crazy. Bob's identity would be revealed to the world soon after the airing of the news expose. He felt he was in danger after coming clean about his experiences and began to receive threats, even though he was presented as an anonymous source. So he felt coming forward would guarantee him the most safety. If the world knew his true name, and he was targeted by a government agency, it would only further prove his claims. Bob would go on to become one of the leading authorities in UFO research, and would become a minor celebrity. He would begin a circuit of never-ending interviews, bombarded with questions by those hoping to find holes in his story, or more information about what the United States government was doing behind closed doors. As expected, Bob did face blowback for his claims. In an early interview, Bob claimed that the real Dennis, the superior at S4 that he had taken the name from, called him and threatened him. Kind of vaguely. But even before he had revealed this information, Bob would suffer threats from the government and his employers at S4. From day one, as he was learning just the very basics of the space program he was involved in, guns would be pointed in his face, security check-ins would take place at his home, and threats against his life and his wife's life were made, in an effort to keep Bob quiet. And after, things would just get worse. According to a friend and neighbor, Mario Santa Cruz, whenever Bob and him would do anything together, he would bring along an Uzi. One time while on the road, someone attempted to shoot out his back tires. They were able to escape. Whether it was with the use of jet engines on his car is unknown, and Bob was supposedly shot at more than once. A year after the news expose went live, Bob Lazar would be arrested, but it wouldn't be for matters of national security. Bob was a pimp. However, he didn't have, quote, the type of involvement when one thinks of a pimp. There were no drugs, nor was there any indication of force or coercion. So he was a nice pimp. Bob had recruited a locally known prostitute, and told her to solicit her customers at a specific apartment, the one Bob was living in. It wasn't his first involvement with prostitution either. In George Knapp's report, he did mention a questionable past involving some work at a local brothel. Lazar claimed he was merely helping the prostitute to modernize her business plan, with the use of computers. However, there were no records found on Bob's computers of anything to do with prostitution spreadsheets or the like. Lazar was trying to recruit other prostitutes from local brothels for his operation, and he let it slip to his friend George Knapp that he planned to open up his very own brothel. Fearing for Bob's reputation, and by association his own credibility, George tipped off the police, leading to Bob's arrest. During the trial, Bob would state that he was scared of prison. His lawyer would say he was being targeted specifically because of the information he had revealed to the public. But the courts decided that because he wasn't violent and was trying to navigate through the confusing world of legal and illegal prostitution by setting up his own legal brothel, just not taking the correct precautions, he wouldn't be sentenced to any time in prison. He would be placed on a year probation and ordered to undergo a year of psychotherapy as well. Bob has seldom spoken on his arrest in the following years. It seems that the charges laid against him are completely unrelated to his revealing of sensitive information. But then, why would his lawyers say he was being targeted? Also, soon after his reveal to the public, in an attempt to prove his credibility, Bob underwent multiple polygraph exams. Conducted by Ron Slay, he was asked of the technology he had seen and the work he had done. The exam was inconclusive. On the first test, he appeared to be entirely truthful, and in the second, his answers were seen as deceptive. Another exam would be conducted on Ron's recommendation. Terry Tavernetti ran a corporate security operation and was a former Los Angeles police officer. He put Lazar through 4 tests and concluded there was no attempt to deceive. He then sent the test results to 2 other polygraph examiners. The first 2 agreed Bob was being truthful. The second, reporting it seemed like Bob was telling second-hand information, but wasn't being outright untruthful. Terry Tavernetti believes that the reason the results were inconclusive were because Bob was in fear for his own well-being, skewing the results of the tests. Eventually, in an attempt to prove everything he could, Bob would also undergo hypnotherapy sessions, trying to remember specific details that could further corroborate his story. But we'll get back to those later. In the years since, Bob has started a company known as United Nuclear, a scientific equipment and supply company that sells everything from aerogel and crystal radios to uranium ore and radioactive samples. Selling sensitive chemicals would once again get Bob into trouble with the law. In 2006, Bob and his wife Joy White were charged with violating the Federal Hazardous Substances Act for shipping restricted chemicals across state lines. These charges stemmed from a raid on Bob's business office in 2003, where chemical sales records were examined. I can't find much information on why this initial raid was conducted in the first place, and to me, it does seem a little suspicious that there appears to be no information on it online. Later, in 2007, United Nuclear was fined another $7,500 for violating a law prohibiting the sale of chemicals and components used to make illegal fireworks. It seemed like maybe Bob was being targeted, or he was at least on the FBI's radar, and there would be more raids to come in the future, as more questions were asked of Bob, and more information about his time employed at S4, some strange details floated to the surface. He had explained to his friends and news outlets a security hand scanner that seemingly analyzed the length of the bones in his fingers, providing a unique fingerprint and granting access to S4 for the employees working there. A piece of technology described as impossible by skeptics at the time. Researcher and director of the movie Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, Jeremy Corbell, found an article that at the Nellis Range stealth program, the same kind of technology was being used. Upon showing images of the scanner to Bob, he confirmed it looked exactly like the one he had seen. Bob also mentioned the program he was working for went by the name Project Aquarius. Upon further research, it was confirmed there was a classified top-secret project going on called Project Aquarius. However, no further information could be declassified. Bob had made specific statements regarding the way the UFOs traveled using gravity, and how what we would normally think of as the bottom of the UFO, staying level with the ground, was actually the propulsion system, and the craft would rotate, pointing the bottom and the propulsion system in the opposite direction of the craft's path of travel. Later on, the gimbal UFO footage would be declassified by the US Navy. It was a video taken in 2015 on board a Navy fighter jet. The UFO seemed to propel itself in the unconventional way Bob had described. The idea of this type of movement hadn't been conceived previously, other than in Bob's descriptions of these alien crafts. And upon seeing the Tic Tac UFO video, another famous UFO video declassified by the Navy, Bob was excited to announce that this was the craft he had referred to during his time employed at S4 as the sport model. He also knew of S4 before pretty much anyone outside of government did. It was confirmed that S4 was indeed a real location, hidden by Papoose Lake, a site nearby Area 51. He knew that hiring for the Navy and Air Force was outsourced to EG&G, proving he did know some things that weren't common knowledge at the time. Which brings us to Element 115. Bob claimed the spacecrafts were powered by an element unknown to the public, unknown even to major scientific research facilities throughout the world. He claimed to have test footage of the element bending light in a cloud chamber, but when he was asked to produce the footage, he was unable to track it down amongst all of his tapes. Element 115 was capable of modifying gravity, and produced its own gravitational energy. He said that if the element's origins were able to be traced, he was certain it had not come from Earth-based scientists. Element 115 would eventually be synthesized by a lab, but it's claimed that it is too unstable and degrades too quickly to have the potential to power UFOs or any kind of propulsion system. Jeremy Corbell, director of Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, elaborated. When Lazar first came forward in 1989, he made a point to explain that there's no reason a version of Element 115 couldn't be synthesized and observed at some point in the future. In fact, he predicted that it would be observed, just likely not in a stabilized form. The isotope discovered in 2003 is not the isotope that would account for what Lazar has described, having had access to while working at Area 51. Lazar reports that the 115 he had access to was far more stable. My understanding of Lazar's thinking is that with the advances in bombardment techniques, new isotopic combinations would be achieved. However, just like how gold has 37 different isotopes and only one is stable, 115 is suspected to have mostly rapid decay isotopes. So hopefully in the future, we will land on a version with a longer half-life, even if it just ends up being a few atoms of it. That would be cool, and one day will likely happen. And upon consulting some of the world's leading experts on heavy elements, Jeremy was told that there is definitely the possibility a stable isotope of the element could be theoretically synthesized. It just hasn't been done yet. According to reports, Bob had even been consulted by the lab that initially synthesized Element 115. Way back in 1989, in some interviews, Bob claimed he was able to sneak a sample of Element 115 out of a government facility. The potential reason for the further raids Bob and his company would undergo. In 2017, during the production of Jeremy Corbell's film, Bob was raided twice. The authorities claimed they were searching for a receipt that proved Bob had shipped a toxic illegal compound back in the early 2000s. Rather than call Bob up and ask him for his records, they stormed his lab, kept all of his employees separated by room, and cordoned off the entire facility into square meter sections, searching and clearing them one by one. According to Bob, not only did the FBI show up, but the state police, the FDA, and Nuclear Regulatory Commission showed up with computer examination teams, bomb squads, and hazmat teams. Lazar called Jeremy and told him they needed to speak. They went to a remote area of forest, turned off their cell phones, and made an agreement. They would speak about what happened and record it as evidence. But Jeremy would encrypt and hide the files on a single drive that would only be accessed if absolutely necessary, or if anything strange came to light. The files would be hidden, and Bob would be raided yet again. The FBI agents quoting Bob and Jeremy's conversation back to him verbatim, alluding to the idea that somehow Bob was under heavy government surveillance. Bob believes he was raided in an attempt for the government to reclaim the sample of 115, but doesn't wish to elaborate on the topic any further than that, out of obvious fear. It is unknown whether he still has or ever had a sample of the element. And though he was told they were investigating, looking for an order invoice for a potentially toxic substance, when a Freedom of Information request was made into the FBI raid on United Nuclear's office, it showed that the raid was part of a, quote, murder investigation. A little bit suspicious. Another thing I discovered after initially recording is that Bob's first wife was a woman named Karl Strong. While they were still married, he married another woman, and 2 days after that, Karl would die. The investigation into her cause of death said that she died of exhaust fumes, leading authorities to believe she had taken her own life. Learning that definitely gives some credence to the fact that the FBI raid was conducted on a murder investigation, but it doesn't really explain why they were investigating it decades later. It would definitely be a cold case at that point. But it does make Bob seem a little more suspicious. Jeremy was later able to track down a 1-minute sample of footage of the supposed cloud chamber with element 115 bending light around it, but the footage has not been made public. This wouldn't really be a Crypto Kappa video if I didn't at least attempt to approach the topic from the other side, the skeptical side. And while there are plenty of questioners, skeptics, and detractors out there in this case, there are a few details that don't really sit right with me personally. Donald Prothero, professional skeptic and author of Abominable Science, a book I heavily referenced in my last video, even made a statement on Bob, and he doesn't outright deny his claims. He was employed not by the government, but rather as a technician working for a private company that contracted work at Los Alamos. Another little add-in to give context to this quote, apparently in the phone book that Bob Lazar was listed in at the Los Alamos lab, there were some initials after his name, supposedly representing the company he worked for, that was doing work with the laboratory, meaning he may have never actually officially worked at Los Alamos, but was just contracted through them. As time goes on, it seems more and more of Bob's claims are being proven true. The unthinkable concept that the US government would be hiding a secret space program is all but fact with the declassifying of certain information and the growing transparency of these organizations. But the thing that bugs me are the parts of Lazar's story he no longer shares. Information that has fallen to the wayside, and is seldom presented alongside his seemingly truthful claims. Like I said before, soon after Bob was revealed to the world, he underwent hypnotherapy sessions in an attempt to uncover further information he had forgotten. I found the records of one of these hypnotherapy sessions, in which Bob recalls some pretty out there stuff regarding alien history, religion, and the purpose of human life according to the aliens. He states there was a book that had 2 front covers. He was able to learn information from the book without ever reading or opening it. Somehow the information seemingly transmitted directly to his head. It spoke of the history of the planet and how long ago these extraterrestrial beings, referred to as kids or greys, intervened in human evolution in an attempt to create containers. Human beings were meant to simply be containers or vessels, Bob thinks, for the souls of this alien race, and that the aliens were helping the human race to develop to suit their own needs. But something went wrong. We became conscious and developed higher thinking, which was never the intention. Individuals not quite human and not quite gray would be placed on Earth to lead us in the right direction. Some would be retrieved in the future, and some would get lost, left to wander Earth until their natural lives would end. One of these individuals was a man in the Middle East, sent to organize and pacify, but he got lost, and the Greys were unsure whether he was killed or not. However, one of the individuals who was retrieved from the Middle East was a man who went by the name Jesus Christ. These individuals had a, quote, induced genetic difference, and their goals weren't to serve the advancement of humankind, but to advance the Greys' own society. Bob Lazar has been called a liar countless times, but his claims in some circumstances have been proven true, or have been proven to at least have some truth to them. If he is a liar, he's an extremely well-informed and capable liar, because watching him speak, he seems entirely truthful and convinced. The part that's strange to me is that certain parts of his story haven't changed, but have been seemingly covered up over the years. I combed through tons of radio interviews, news features, and TV specials about Bob Lazar, and never once is this Jesus stuff mentioned. The more reasonable and possible claims seem to be featured heavily in the media regarding Bob, but the more out there stuff, like claiming he saw an actual alien inside of S4 sitting with officials, a statement he now questions himself, and the religious stuff is seemingly erased, like his past. If you search Bob Lazar Jesus on Google, you will find no mention of these claims, but they're there in his session transcripts in plain black and white, along with the foreboding double-sided Bible. The only other time that it seems to me like Bob was goofing around is when he speaks about why he chose the name Dennis. He almost seems at that time less concerned for his safety, because knowing the name Dennis would directly relate him to his superior. It seems that with time, either he began to believe his own story more, or he at least realized the severity of what he was doing. In the end, I believe Bob. Too much of what he's said has been proven true with time, and who knows what else will be proven as science advances. But there's a reason these whack-job religious claims were left out. Most likely to keep the credible parts of his story the focus. And that's not to say what he's saying about Jesus being an alien isn't true, but if that part of his story were the focus, I think it would be a lot easier to discredit him. I hope you enjoyed the story of Bob Lazar. There are countless documents out there, drawings of spacecrafts, diagrams of propulsion systems, information on Element 115, that you can delve even deeper into if you enjoy this topic. And it really is fun to research. I'm kinda shocked that none of the Jesus and religious type stuff is more in the mainstream, because it seems like an easy way to paint Bob as a nutjob and detract from the truths that have been told. But look into it yourself and make up your own mind. I hope I was able to present some new information to help you reach a decision on what you believe. Because even though I've known of Bob Lazar for a while and researched him in the past, I was able to find some stuff that wasn't really common knowledge, and I'm sure that there's even more out there that I didn't cover today. I'm going to link a Google Drive folder in the description with transcripts of the hypnotherapy records, if you want to read them yourself. They're pretty hard to find. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's story, then like and subscribe, please. And share the video with your conspiracy theorist friends. Skeptics too. Doesn't really matter. I'll keep doing my best to delve deep into these cases, and present whatever new or less common unknown information that I can. It's really exciting when you find something that doesn't seem to be mainstream information, especially on such a covered topic. Peace!